Now, the definition of Uncle Tom has been mischaracterized all throughout history. It's ridiculous. But of course, if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. And there was ignorance surrounding slavery, even abolitionism. There's a lot of abolitionists that were despised, okay, by Northerners and of course Southerners, because they embellished things. But what Harriet Beecher Stowe did, she actually characterized slavery pretty well in her book. She really, really did. And over the course of this video, I'm going to explain, things that happened in this movie. But yes, Uncle Tom was a religious man. He was decent and he wasn't servile like they say. Like, Uncle Tom was very respectable. So when they say an Uncle Tom, it means nowadays it means like you're not respectable, like you're doing everything you agree with everything the white man says and does. Like, no, that's what not, Uncle Tom was not about that at all. But you're gonna see it throughout the movie.
In 1852, a book was published that shocked the nation and the world. Within a decade of its publication, it became the most popular novel ever written by an American. The book was Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Historians argue that Stowe's work altered the history of our country and ignited the spark that started the Civil War. Many called it a triumph of reality, immortal, and one of the greatest triumphs recorded in literary history. A week after its initial publication, 10,000 copies of the book had been sold. By the end of the year, 8 printing presses could not keep up with the demand. The novel was translated into over 20 foreign languages, and it is said that only the Bible ever surpassed its record-breaking appeal. For all its popularity, Uncle Tom's Cabin also generated intense literary, social, and political criticism. The author's detractors argue to this day that she reduced in a single book a proud, struggling race of people into demeaning stereotypes. Later, stage and movie adaptations of the book reinforced that perception, portraying Uncle Tom as a cowering, shiftless black man who would do anything for his white master, even turn on his fellow slaves. The racial slur Uncle Tom endures to this day. Showtime's production of Uncle Tom's Cabin attempts to return us to the original spirit of the novel. At special advance screenings of the film across the country, audience members were encouraged to talk to cast members and production personnel about the historical misrepresentation and racial implications of Harriet Beecher Stowe's book. Many were surprised to learn that Uncle Tom's Cabin had nothing to do with the pejorative, demeaning stereotype that history has created.
I've always seen this image of Uncle Tom as an old, stooped-down black man with gray hair and sort of a benevolent individual. This is the first time in my life that my eyes have ever been opened to the real person, the individual, what he actually stood for.
History tells us that Harriet Beecher Stowe was vehemently angered by slavery. And in Showtime's adaptation of the book, Uncle Tom is portrayed as she described him, a man with intense yet quiet dignity who fights his struggle for freedom through his unwavering belief in God.
Can I take care of you tonight, Mama?
Whatever for?
I heard you up last night. I just want to help.
Oh, you sweet angel. Mammy will take care of me.
I don't think Mammy's feeling too well.
Oh, nonsense. She's strong as a horse. She's such a peculiar child. Always disposed to spend time with the servants. Of course, I used to play with my father's little Negroes. Never did me any harm. With Eva, she treats them like equals.
You see, that little girl was actually raised by slaves. She was raised by slaves because slaves, they rear the white children. They teach them, they bring them up. So all her kindness and how proper she is, that comes from the slaves. You understand? So all this talk about how black people are savages or black people are inferior and this and that, it's not true. Okay? And the thing is that you do that often enough, then you have future slave owners that are respectable towards black people. And yes, most of the slave owners were very respectable towards black people. They treated black people very well. If you read the slave narratives, it's a huge read, but if you read most of it, You know, most of the people that talked about their former life in under slavery, they have positive things to say about it. Yes, some of them are negative, and some of the people who actually say that, yeah, my master was good to me. We had a lot of food and everything like that. We had parties. We had time off. It was great. But some of the Negroes, they got whipped for stealing or for doing things that they're not supposed to do. They did get whipped. They did get beat. But overall, the master was very good because there was a lot of discipline under slavery. You see, in the North, there was no discipline. Like, if you wanted to leave a job, you could leave the job if you want. But the thing is that, do you have another job to go to? And then if you don't find another job, what are you going to do? You're out in the slums. You're actually trying to find a way to survive, and then you start stealing, you start murdering, and for under slavery, no, you couldn't do that in the South. You couldn't do that in the South. So if there was a black person that was on the side of the road, they'll like find some way to help him out. He'll get food, he'll get shelter, and he'll have a place to work, place to stay, and then work his way up to whatever he wants to be. If he wants to remain a slave, then he remains a slave, but he could work out of slavery, because you could become a blacksmith or some kind of trade you could learn, and then you could definitely get out of slavery if you want to. You understand? It was very disciplined slavery. The North, no. And the North had children working in factories. Nobody even talks about that. And it was very dangerous. They treated the children badly, very low pay. And how is it that you have a country, well, the North is supposed to be rich, and yet children, they have to put their children into factories as young as like 6 years old or 7? Are you serious? Like, working in dangerous conditions. Usually when they talk about kids in the slave narratives, the kids are actually playing. They're actually playing. They're not really put to work right away. They might do some chores here and there, but they're not do any backbreaking work, not at all, under slavery. As far as like I hear in the slave narratives, they hardly do any backbreaking work. But as far as in the North, yeah, they had children in mines, crawling up chimneys, in Europe, working in the factories, nasty environment, deadly machines. They got killed, limbs got chopped off, they were beaten, they were chained to the machines. It was very bad. But yet nobody really talks about the North and how they had a nasty attitude towards black people in the North. They had nasty laws against black people, sundown towns, and there was a lot of race riots before the Civil War. So it's like, well, and they had de facto segregation. So it's like, well, nobody talks about that. And lots of poverty amongst white people and black people. And lots of people were deranged far more in the North than they were in the South. You understand? Because of the environment that they fostered. But this is not talked about. It's always the South this, the South that, the South that. That's why abolitionists were despised, not only by Northerners, but by Southerners. And Northerners, the most bigoted, racist Northerner, white person, would actually despise abolitionists because they know that, hey, you see how we treat free black people here, and you're concerned about enslaved black people, supposedly enslaved black people in the South? What is your game? What are you really up to? Okay, and you see white people that are in poverty. You see black people that are in poverty. You're not seem to be concerned about that. You're concerned about people hundreds of miles away. What are you up to? They didn't like abolitionists. Abolitionists were despised. You have to understand the game. They're not really telling you the true history of slavery. They're really, really not. In America, they're not. I'm not talking about other places, but in America, no. They're not really telling you the true nature of slavery in America. It's just so annoying.
I want you to know I'm going to report this to the first law officer I see.
Oh, now you do that. Who you going to have as a witness?
Now, that was the son of Uncle Tom's first slave owner. Okay, he came back to collect Uncle Tom, but he was too late. He made a promise to Uncle Tom early on, but and then he came back, but it was years later, but it was way too late, and Uncle Tom is dead at that point. And then noticed that he wanted to turn him in. But the thing is that he had to have witnesses. But see, so there was recourse for slaves. You understand? But you have to have a witness. You understand? If you can't prove it, then it's a problem. It's the same thing with policemen, right? So if a policeman does something to a black person or anybody, the policeman is going to be believed over anybody, the person that they assaulted. The same thing with a slave master. He's going to be believed over the slave, but you have to have proof. If you have absolute proof, then yeah, like the slave owner is going to be put up on charges. But the thing is that he said, like, well, do you have any proof? Because he knows that if he has proof, then oh my god, that yeah, I'm in trouble. But if you have no proof, then you're not going to do anything. It's the same thing with police officers today. Today, it's the same thing. They could get away with that. The same things that the slave owners got away with, some of the slave owners got away with, the police officers get away with today because they're going to be believed over their victim. Interesting, isn't it? Now, if you read the book or watched the movie, you realize that Uncle Tom had 3 masters. 2 of them actually were decent. The last one was horrible, and that's where he met his fate, his end. Now, the first master, well, he didn't want to sell. He was going to give Uncle Tom his freedom, but he was in debt. So the collector wanted the best worker, which was Uncle Tom, and a child in order to, erase his debt. So he had to sell, and he was ashamed about it. He didn't want to do it, but that's what he had to do. So he had a second master, and that master was decent as well. And his daughter was nice, but the wife was a bitch. and something happened to him. He was gonna give Uncle Tom his freedom. He got killed, and then Uncle Tom had to be sold because the wife was going to sell because she needed money. So she didn't want to honor her daughter's last wishes because her daughter died. She didn't want to honor her wishes. She wanted to sell. Uncle Tom was a prized slave, so she wanted to sell him. And then he ended up in the hands of a bad master. Okay, now the thing is that that's what Southerners were saying. Southerners were constantly saying that, yes, there are problems within our system. Just like the North had lots of problems, but nobody talks about that. That yes, there were some slave owners that treated their slaves very badly. Okay, but that was a minority. The abolitionists make it seem that that was the majority, like all slaveholders were bad, even black slaveholders and women slave owners. And notice that they don't really mention black slave owners whenever they talk about slavery. They don't mention women slave owners either, because there were quite a few women slave owners. They don't really talk about that. And when you have one side just saying, talking about the other, and the other doesn't have can't get a word in edgeways, then it's a problem. You know that, okay, there's one side talking, and I can't get the other side. So that's a problem. And, yeah, so there's a misconception about slavery all throughout history. Now, she explains it actually very well, because she points out that, yeah, he had 2 good masters and 1 bad master, because that happens. And even in the slave narratives, they talk about that. Most of the slave narratives is positive, not negative. But notice that historians, they'll just tell you the negative stuff. They won't talk about the positive stuff. And if they do acknowledge the positive stuff, they're going to say, oh, they were probably lying, and they were intimidated by the white people that were interviewing them. And it's like, oh my God. If you know anything about old people, they actually... Yes, some of them might embellish, but the thing is that they tell you a matter of fact. They tell you exactly what happened back in the day. They don't like, really make things up. They tell you exactly what happened back in the day, and that's what they did. And most of the slave narratives were positive, not negative.